Rita Golden again. This is another one of my conversations with new, strong Black women about the issues of mental health, physical health, and how they are maintaining all of that in their lives as a natural part of their lives. Today, I'm talking with my friend, fellow writer, Rochelle Soetan. And Rochelle, when we were thinking about what we talk about, we decided that we wanted to just dive into the deep end of the pool, the deep water, and talk a little bit about therapy, counseling, psychology, and our experiences with therapy and how it has helped us. Because as you know, there still remains in our community a stigma. There remains a stigma in the larger society, but there is probably an even deeper stigma in our culture, because so often we're stigmatized, marginalized. But I think that this is something that is dissipating, and we're getting more comfortable talking about it. So I'm really glad that you're willing to talk with us about your experiences with therapy. And I know the first thing people often think is that you go into therapy one time, bam, you come out and it's all fixed. But I know in my experience, I've been in therapy a couple of times to help me deal with various life crises and stresses, and it's been enormously helpful. What about you?
Well, I have been in therapy for a span over about 3 decades. It started in my mid-20s after I attempted to commit suicide for the second time. And I knew at that time, no one had to really tell me. There wasn't really a strong support system around me at that time that was encouraging me to go to therapy. It was just a knowing that I knew
Right.
that if I wanted to be better and get better, that something had to change. I didn't know what that was going to look like, what form that was going to take. And it ended up being therapy. So I went to therapy about 4 years after that incident. That was around 1999, 98. And here we are, 23, 22 years later, and I find myself in therapy again. It has been a challenging journey, but it has been an appreciative journey. I am very appreciative that I, have the knowing of what needs to be done, even if it takes me quite a while to get to that point. I know that I can get to that point. And so I recently returned to therapy, married now for the second time. My children are grown, so my circumstances are very different now than they were 22 years ago. But the challenges are somewhat of the same, and I find that some of those same challenges are coming back again. And so my idea of healing is that it's a never-ending process.
Exactly.
We don't just heal and get over it and then we're good forever. It's really a consciousness that we have to take, a conscious approach that we have to take. And I love, your book and this new project that you've released. It's so important and so necessary to share with Black women that you can crack, you likely will crack.
Yes.
And you'll heal, and then you'll crack, and then you'll heal again. And I'm one of the women who has cracked and healed many times over.
Yes. I think it was important that you mentioned that you're at a different point in your life, because our lives are composed of stages, and each stage of our lives presents different challenges. And we need to develop and discover and create different tools to meet the challenges of each phase of life. Middle age, older age, adolescence. And I wanted to ask you, sometimes for African American women, there's the issue of finding a therapist who is, quote, culturally sensitive. Now, in my experience, I've had both white and Black therapists, and I never had any real problem with the white therapists feeling that they were culturally insensitive. But the therapist that really took me over the finish line at one point in my life, so to speak, and really helped me heal so that I could create a really satisfying relationship with a man in my life was an African American woman, Audrey Chapman. And so what would advice would you give, or what's your experience been around that issue?
Oh, speaking of Audrey Chapman, Getting Good Loving,
Yeah.
that book, that book,
Right.
that book is a keeper. It's a lifetime reference. I've had, in my experience, both an African American woman therapist
Mhm,
and a white male therapist.
mhm,
And like you, I'm not at the finish line, but like you, I do feel that having that um, uh, cultural link is important. Being able to identify from one Black woman to another is important. There are so many things that I'm still working on, and so I don't know who is going to get me over the finish line as of yet. But I'm in the running, and it's interesting because at the time that I went to therapy the first time around, I really did not think after that experience that I would ever really need therapy again.
mhm.
And I was in my mid 20s, and I'm now approaching 50. So it's a very different time, and I know more now than I knew then. But it's very interesting in that way that I thought, I've done the work.
Right.
I've continued to do the work. I've got the bullet points, I've got the tips, and I'm going to use those and apply them. And of course, every decade has brought with it for me different challenges in terms of dealing with myself and my
Mhm.
relationships.
Exactly. So as we finish up, I wanted to talk about how do we create conversations with younger sisters about mental health care. I've shared with friends that recently had a conversation with a little girl in our family who had lost her father. And she shared with me that she hadn't cried, that she was holding her grief and her sadness in. And so I know that now I'm charged with, whenever I'm with this young girl, having conversations, reaching out to her in physical ways that legitimize for her the expression of complicated, difficult emotions. And going forward, I'm going to do that. Um, and I think that for our younger sisters, it's really important that we share with them what we know. And just a word about the finish line. I think that there's about 125 different finish lines that we cross in our lives. So we crossed that one, and then we've got to go to another one. But um, what advice do you have?
For Black women, my advice would be knowing when to stand up, when to sit down.
Mm,
Really knowing, when to pay it forward and when to push it back.
mhm,
We have to not only mentor the younger generations, but
mhm,
we have to support. We have to support. We have to know when we're being supported and how to support others. I think that's really critical. A lot of times, a lot of us we want to be in the limelight. We want to be, at the front of the race. But sometimes we have to step back and pay it forward.
mhm.
And so I think that's very important when it comes to younger women because I've seen it throughout, Hollywood and celebritism that a lot of people aren't Some are and some aren't. But when we win, it's a win for all of us.
Mhm, mhm.
So we've got to do that. So
Yeah,
that would be my advice is knowing when to step forward and when to step back.
yeah. Great. That's great advice. Well, thank you, Rochelle. I really appreciate this conversation, and I think it's going to be very, very helpful for those who view it. Thank you, dear.
So much for having me.